Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you all doing?
Good. Thanks for asking. How about yourself?
I'm well, Dad, Mom. Uh, a Another wonderful service you all provided and
Really?
facilitated. Totally enjoyed the praise, the worship, the message, and the fellow could get used to this. I
What?
mean, this has just been an unbelievable experience on so many levels, but just the place that we have to reach to be able to worship and connect with the message and connect with the body, I think has been really, really healthy and fulfilling. So that's what I mean when I say we could get used to it, but I know everybody's anxious to get back into the service.
Yeah.
And if I were to thematically lay out the direction we're headed in this conversation, I would say we are talking about phasing. Mm,
Talking about what?
phasing.
Phasing.
Amazing. Yes.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. So the act of transitioning or moving throughout change or a process, phasing. And we know the country right now is in a phase. We are moving into another level of activism and civil advocacy. We know there's a general election happening in November. We know the country and individual states are moving through designated phases of completely reopening as it relates to the pandemic. And I know that we all, as individuals, going through the quarantine and social distancing, have gone through some phases, if you will, and maybe now even a phase. So I wanted to focus the conversation today on phasing. Let's begin with this question. What is a question you have asked yourself in these past couple months? What's a question within the context of phasing or this phase? What's a question you've asked yourself within the last couple of months?
Well, the question has been really continually for the last couple of months. I'm like, Lord, what's really going on? What are you really doing here? Uh, Whatever it is, I don't want to miss God's message because we know His hand is truly in it, and His hand is guiding. Um, so my question really has been, God, what are you really doing? What do you want us to get? What's the message here that you really want us to get? And I know we've all said different things, but God, what is it really? I mean, I know the Lord is trying to get the people's attention. I know He wants His glory. I know um, that we've pretty much inched God out of our lives, if I could say it that way, inched, because our worship and our praises and our religious sect in the world has gotten smaller and smaller. We've really transitioned into worshiping other things, whereas Sunday was a sacred day. God was a sacred deity, our God as the world recognized Him, because we know us as the United States recognize God for that, for who He is, because we were founded on the principles of God we trust, and we prayed before we started the Senate, every day, in our government, in our schools, and everything. So, and it's slowly but surely God has gotten smaller in our lives. Even our time of worship, Sunday wasn't a rush. Um, Even though everyone doesn't worship God the same way, but Sunday was not a rush. I think we kind of talked in the conversation before this how businesses were closed on Sundays. Most people did not work on Sundays, and now Sundays is just another day. It's just another day. So, God, what are you What is it that you're really, because I know without a doubt the message is to the world and not just to the church. This is a worldwide message. Yeah.
Excellent. Dad, what question have you asked yourself within the past couple months of this latest phase?
What question?
What question have you asked yourself?
How about questions? How about the whole?
Let's take one, because I got a bunch of questions and I'm getting through them today. I'm getting through them.
Wow.
Thank you, sir.
Wow. And I'm have to pause on that one because it's been so many.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been so many, I cannot focus in on one right now.
Okay, that's fair.
But the one, oh my goodness. Off the top of my head, it would be my position. Where are you positioning me in all of this? You're looking at, I'm taking in a local church, taking in my family, I'm taking in my community, taking in the things on the national level. And I'm looking at the two storms that have collided. I talked about that earlier in one of our segments during the Honorable Bible Institute or the weekly Bible study on Wednesday. But these two storms that have collided together. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really looking at thinking more about me, what do I do? You know, the overall, I want to be better. I want to be more impactful. It looks like like the COVID-19 has a direct path. Mm-hmm. Look like there has been a resurgence of the civil rights movement that the generation prior to me have said this generation has gone quiet. Like most of the things that was gained, we've lost or people have gotten quiet. Now there's a resurgence of civil rights movement now. So things have to change. Things are changing. Things have to change. So then I'm looking at where do I fit in at? You know, yeah. And then the other point to that, where do I fit in at my age? So I guess that's where I'm at, because since everything is taken has its road, it's traveling in certain areas, then where do I go with this? And so we know that there's what I looked at as being the normal. That day's gone. For whatever reason. I mean, we know the reasons why. The doors have been closed so quick. I'm looking at this, since you asked me that question, again, it's so much. If you open up, when I was younger, and when it got hot in the house, we had a screen door at the back door, and Mom would prop the screen door open a lot of times, and then to let more air in, and all of a sudden, if a big strong wind come and slam that screen door, you could hear it, you know. And so the door was open, and all of a sudden, a strong wind came in, slammed the door, and that exactly is what has happened. The door was open, strong wind came in, slammed the door. So the door that had been slammed shut is the door of what used to be normal. It's a different day now. So when you open up the door again, normal is not normal anymore. There's going to be a new normal. And I have to be, whether I like it or not, I have to be a part of this new normal.
Absolutely. Well, that's very helpful. And I think, and you all may have heard me say it, I probably repeated myself as I have the tendency to do from time to time. But in this day, we are so used to access and quick and mass communication. We're so inundated with stories and volume of information, which now puts a expectation on new and sensational. And as a result of new and sensational, we feel the need in our own personal lives to have to create a new and a sensational. And especially as it relates to those who engage in social media, which is very, very widespread, especially among my generations and generations your age, but more a little bit younger than you all, leading up to my generation and down. But we have a temptation to draw conclusions prematurely. We go through something and we can't wait to post it and say, this is the conclusion. This is the lesson learned. I went through this. God wants me to know this. I went through that, and this is where he wants me to be. I went through this, and this is who that person is. I went through this. I witnessed this. This is who these companies and corporations are. And we are closing chapters. We're putting periods at the ends of sentences prematurely because we are in a society and a day of mass communication, frequent communication, instant communication. And now we don't have the temperance and the patience to wait for the true conclusion. We force it because we can't wait to share it. Before we learn it, before we grow from it, we can't wait to put it out there for somebody else. And that is something that I think is really dangerous. So I wanted to start with that question, which was, what questions have you all been asking yourselves? Because I think it's appropriate, especially now, to be okay with still waiting on the answer. It's okay to ask a question and not in a moment, not in a 24-hour news cycle, have the answers and the conclusion. And I think it's important for us to think about and really spend time with the questions and not try to nail the answer and move on so quickly. So I will continue with that line of thought within the context of what we're talking about today, which is phasing. Share, if each of you would briefly, one insight, and I don't mean necessarily conclusion or answer or resolution, but share one insight you've personally gained related to the phase that we're in.
Dependency. We have been, when I say we, society at large has had the emergency brake pulled. And everything that we know or knew has came to a sudden halt. And some of the common things that were instilled in us from a previous generation has been reactivated. And I was chuckling with myself earlier. I was laughing in the earlier days when your mom said as she was going to grocery stores and how they were cleaning out the shelves and things like that, hoarding food, and the list goes on. And I was thinking on how that we got full from gravy and bread And Mom, the gravy was so good. It just like, man, you don't want nothing else and just to have it poured over some bread and got full. The previous generation put in us a mechanism that we forgot about. And we've been going on and rushing and doing things because how the world has just been so quick to bring new things in. It's hard to wear stuff out now because by the time you get something and try it or use it for 30, 60 days, they got something new, you know? And so the mechanism is little, doing the little things. Do you not know that a smile or a smile of appreciation, positive thinking, the little things that brought a generation before us much peace and calmness is we've forgotten. When you don't have, you make do with what you have. And you didn't have to spend a lot of money. It didn't cost you nothing. It just cost you patience. It costs you just use what you have. And when I said put the emergency brake on, life stopped. And now they're talking about reopening. Another word for reopening, starting again. They want the society to reopen up. They want everything to reopen, you know. Your life now to start up, start living again, start doing again. And with all of that, anger, frustration, racism, the lack of, hasn't went anywhere. It's still there. But there's a scripture that says to be content in the state that you're in. Because the worst thing could befall you. So I was thinking about the generation prior. And I'm just so thankful for the little thing. I am thankful for a quiet house, a quiet room. I'm thankful for peace. Do you not know that no one's in a hurry to go nowhere? A few months ago, we was in a hurry to do everything. But now, being in a hurry, the emergency brake has been pulled on being in a hurry. We got more time now on our hands than we ever had before. Do you not know that you can sit up in your house? I'm talking about your house. And as busy as your schedule is, you could sit up in your house and sit in a corner and appreciate the blessings of God. There's a molding that you didn't know that you had in your house, that it stands out, it's beautiful. You would say, man, I never noticed that molding like that in my house. Appreciation. God has given the world that was at a standstill to appreciate him. So that's kind of where I'm at. And it really is strength to you. You know, it really is. In spite of everything that's going on, and even in the unrest, it was always there. It just needed a spark to fire up that engine again. And now the engine is running. And do you not know that people are finding their place right today? There's a resurgence of civil rights movement. It shows you what has been quiet and what not. You know, so there's a lot of different things. You know, do you know? And I'll pass the baton. You know what I thought about just today? It was earlier today.
Yes, sir.
I said, with being clean, clean your hands, you know, wearing a mask and things like this, I believe that the common cold, those that are affected by the common cold, is going to go down. When the flu season comes, I can see it, it's still here, but I'm seeing those that would catch the flu will go down.
By virtue of those habits gained. Yeah.
Because the habits now have changed. And you know, cold was passed on by people sneezing and touching things wasn't clean. You know, I see a blessing in cleanliness now. We'll go clean now. Now you still got some people that are not. But overall, your house is cleaner than what it's ever been. The doorknobs are clean. You can touch things now, and you know you talking about squeaky clean. Do you not germs are protesting now? We can't get Quentin. We can't get him. He's too clean now.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, they used to say cleanliness is next to godliness.
Right.
It wasn't a scripture.
No.
So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And my thought there on that is, again, you might say, oh, she always takes the religious side, the spiritual side. But I thought about how it's quiet from the religious world now. I heard somebody say, where are the prophets now? I've heard it more than once. It used to be back in troubled times, like this, times of pandemic, times of war. You had great evangelists, men and women of God, really step forward during times like these. And they would call great crusades, revivals, tent revivals, prayer meetings. And I was just, as I was sitting here, I was writing down some of the ones like as I came up. Your Jimmy Swaggarts, your John Hagee's, your Peter Popoff is like a newer one probably. Kenneth Copeland, these guys, you know, your renowned worldwide evangelists, televangelists come forth at these times. And they would always have a prophecy, what God had given them. That's one thing, it's quiet in the religious world right now. And that's the reason why I go back again. God, what are you really trying to tell us right now? And then, you know, the people of color, we had our Dr. Martin Luther King. He was a preacher, you know, and he did not just civil rights, but he also, you know, prayed in things, and even your Jesse Jacksons and stuff. These people stepped up and they had big crusades and they consulted God, and they would have a revelation for the world, what's going on in the world. And these things you're not seeing and you're not hearing right now. So the church has gone quiet. Why? There have been big ministries birthed out of times like these, but it's quiet now. You have some people that are kind of, they're a quiet voice that's kind of peeking through, but you're not having a big revolution of the church right now. And before, you know, the church, the television was bombarded with these prophets. Everyone had a prophetic word from God. Everyone had a prophetic sign from God. God told them to tell somebody, you know, as they were saying. So where is that now? The church world is silent.
Can I make a point with that, First Lady? And I'm not saying that they got it from me, but I've been saying that for a long time now. Same thing what you're saying. And what you see is the opposite. You're seeing more psychologists are talking more. Where are you at, and what you should be doing, and dealing with the psyche of man. And with all of this, if you notice, we wasn't living during that time, but through the biblical study, theology has let us know that between Malachi and Matthew, I think they deepened about 400 years.
Silent years.
They call it the silent years.
Yes.
There was sporadic miracles happen, sporadic, but there was no voice from earth to heaven. God wasn't speaking, and somebody would get deep and say, well, God doesn't always speak in an audible voice. There was no great move of God between the closure of the Old Testament, the schoolmaster, to the New Testament. And since that is the quietness according to biblical scripture and theology, my imagination has wrapped my brain around. Maybe this is how it felt during that time.
Well, and even in the past, during times of upheaval like this, even the presidents had a pastor that they consulted. They had a religious leader or a spiritual leader that they consulted, during times like these.
Right.
We're not even seeing that now. I know that kind of tickled us into something else, but
Well,
it's the truth.
Go ahead. No, please, Mom, please.
No, it's the truth. So, I think for us as Christians, religious people, whatever umbrella you put yourself under, I think we need to be asking that question. During times like these, we call for the church to pray and fast. And I know we do it in the Church of God in Christ, but a lot of us have linked up with other things and linked up with causes that we're fighting for a cause, or we're the voice for the cause, but we're still leaving God out of the picture. God, we'll say God in a still quiet voice, and the cause is louder, it's greater, it's more magnified, where it used to be the church, we didn't care if people laughed at us. We didn't care. This was the time where we stood up and said, we are going to pray. We are going to have a tent revival. We are going to have a crusade, because the world needs us. The world is in trouble, and we understood. And I think that it goes right back to the first question you asked us, Quentin. Even, we used to say the world needs us and everything, but now we're everything's about self. We draw the conclusions. We don't wait on God. We don't seek God. We need it now. We need to put it out there now. We don't have time to wait,
Absolutely. So I got 30 minutes. I got 30 minutes, and I got through 2 questions.
I had a good one, Clay. I had a good one.
Let me, I really would love to yield and try to come right back around to that point. But I want to also be sensitive to something you introduced, as opposed to just flowing through the rest of the questions. And I think you all will appreciate this one. One of the things that, and Dad is good for this, if there's, and I know my dad well, I know Dad's top 7 principled biblical texts that the foundation of his ministry and his character stands on. And two of those would be Ephesians, the 4th chapter. The other would be 1 Corinthians, the 12th chapter. I don't care what conversation you're in, we come back to those two of 7. And I can tell you the other 5, but you have to tune in. But I know where he stands, and I know where Mom stands. And, well, so to make this point, but I'd love, maybe after we finish this call, I'll tell you Mom's top 7, and I'll tell you Dad's top 7. But I think one of the things you all introduced and uncovered, and something that is relative to this phase, has been the perspective of the church among things. Now, I'm not saying paramount to or more prevalent against some others, but I would say the church's perspective has changed, because for so long we would look at Ephesians 4 and we saw 5 positions and we built a lot around those positions, but we forgot that in the 12th verse it talks about gifts. So even though there are 5 prominent roles that are named in Ephesians 4 and 11, prophets, teachers, pastors, evangelists, right? And not in that order, by the way. I do know the scriptures, so you know, don't get me there. Not in that order, but those 5. But also in verse 12, it speaks to gifts. Media was so demonized when it came out. First television, then cinema or the movies, right? This generation, my generation, we probably don't even know what the word cinema means. It's such an antiquated word, right? Cinema or the movies, so to speak. And then the internet were so demonized for years. But what church now, if they don't already utilize it, isn't clamoring to move ministry online? And we're 3 months now in, right? What church now doesn't value someone with a computer science or information technology background, especially to manage financial resources? What church now isn't concerned with data security, making sure that as donations and free will offerings and tithes are submitted online, we want to make sure that people's card and bank information, you know, isn't somehow accessed, right? People are concerned with that. In even the church leaders, you're concerned about your own personal finances and data security, right? We are concerned now, especially with the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and we can continue to keep going with all those martyrs. But law enforcement, holding the law enforcement accountable, in the courts of justice, in the halls of justice. We now have a greater appreciation, and we've now embraced gifts and roles more now than we ever have. Whereas before, we were focused on prophets, teachers, evangelists, pastors, right? We were so focused on apostles. We were so focused on those 5. Now that 12th verse comes in and we think about the other gifts. We think about people who are working in all these other areas, and we are wanting them to be Christ-minded. We want them to uphold Christian principles, if not being Christian themselves. We value this now more than ever. And one of the subplots, and you all tease this out in your comments, one of the subplots now is we have a value for gifts now that are much broader than just the 5. We're now looking at that verse 12. And when you go over to 1 Corinthians, the 12th chapter, same thing. We are looking now at gifts in administration, right? We are now looking at, that was Ethan and Karen, we are now looking at a more prominent role and need for psychologists and therapists and family therapists, right? We are now, again, holding in higher regard some of these occupations that really take gifted people, but we understand the application of those gifts and those occupations when they work for us and when they work against us, right? And I think that has been a subplot in this phase, even as it relates to the supply chain, even as it relates to factory workers, right? In the meat processing industry, even as it relates to people, you know, who work on the front lines as it relates to grocery stores and those kind of service industries. Dad was talking about how we now are more mindful of our sanitizing and our personal health, but now we value people who are integral and they aren't doing things behind the scenes and not being accountable behind the scenes, to the point where that negligence, could affect public health, right? And those are all things that raise now. I think the church, more than any other time, has a greater appreciation and awareness of all these other giftings and all these other administrative areas and callings that people can be called to as salt, if you will, and what it means now to encourage and cultivate people in their desires to work in these places and to infiltrate these spaces, because it is a part of the godly calling of the way we are to impact this world. I've seen that now more than ever. And I offer that out, as a comment, and you all are welcome to respond to. But I've never seen that in all of my years, hearing sermons upon sermons, attending services upon church gatherings, conferences, workshops. I think now we have a more widespread appreciation. And I think as a result, we're going to be encouraging the next generations to go off into all of these areas, because now it's not just a learning burning conversation, and y'all know what I'm talking about. But now we understand what it means to have people with Christian principles and convictions that are influencing in these areas, because we see the impact on the greater world, is what I'm getting to.
Can I? And there's a picture, I don't know if you have it or not, but there's a picture of me with the governor, Robert D. Ray, back in, I don't know what year that was, 60, but anyway, I was 10.
It was in the 70s. It had to be.
Was it?
Because you look like you were probably about.
But anyway, I was
Early 70s.
I was
Governor Robert D. Ray of Iowa.
right, and there was a photo shoot of me and the governor in his office, and they were asking. I remember they was asking me different things about my future and different things like that, and it just came back to my mind, and so I don't know how I got picked out. And my art teacher, I was young in the elementary school. I must have had a bad day and got some people in trouble. And he said, Gilbert, you don't realize that you are a leader and you can lead people to do what's right. Why are you leading these children to do wrong? He said, you better than that. Now, my mind is coming, and I'm thinking. President John F. Kennedy started a lot of reforms in the nation during the civil rights movements and things like this before he was assassinated. And they was trying to rally people to go to the Peace Corps and things like that. They was trying to get people to be more active in society. And
right.
This is, I can see, this is a replay of what was going on through the late 60s, early 70s. Then it went quiet. Mm-hmm. If you notice, I preached this morning about a setup. Jesus was accused of being silent with Lazarus. Okay, the message came, he's sick. He didn't go see about him. The next thing you know, he's dead. Jesus was accused of being silent, and it hurt him. Not because he didn't have the power, but on how we think, how the human man thinks in his mind.
Yes, sir.
What's going on? You see a great move everywhere. And I keep saying it's going to be a great revival. It's going to break out. But no one is talking about salvation. What you said, I see everything that you see, all the different areas. But during the time now, these two crises, these two storms are coming together. It would be very boring to the normal ear to hear about heaven right now. People are not talking about heaven. And that would really be a boring conversation. But all of this is going on. It's a setup. It really is a setup. It is a great awakening. It's a great biblical awakening that the church has to grab a hold of.
Right. And you're on the right point, Dad. And when I say that, I'm saying within the context of that scripture. And Mom, I know you're going to jump in, but let me read this from the New International Version. Here's 1 Corinthians 12:7. Now to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. The manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. In all of those areas, and you're right, people aren't preaching about heaven and salvation, but now we see the impact of the world when we're not using those gifts toward the common good. Think about the politicians and the mayors and the reopening of the churches, and even here in Chicago, where when the school districts were shut down, it took for someone to pull the alarm and say, remember, we're feeding children during the day. And if we shut down the schools, think about how many children aren't fed. Think about, so that's where those Christian principles and how the Spirit works to evoke us toward the common good solve these crises that we're facing now. So I think we're at the right point where we do as a church have to illuminate people who are using their gifts toward the common good. And through all these occupations and areas, from school teachers teaching virtually, from people who are setting policy on emergency child care centers, because frontline workers, those who are essential workers in frontline positions, still have daycare and child care needs. That's a Christian principle and concern of benevolence, right? So it's that common good exactly that I'm talking about. But Mom, you were going to jump in. Go ahead. I don't want to chew up your time. I know we got 16 minutes. Go ahead, Mom.
Okay. I'm going to speed up my
talk.
Go ahead. But I want to take it back. We as a race of people now have permission. We have even given ourselves permission. And society has sort of given us more permission than we've ever had to use those gifts. When I say take it back, as slaves, and most of us kind of, this generation maybe kind of know, about slavery a little bit, what has not been covered. But we know as a generation, as a race of people, the only thing that was really afforded to us that they couldn't take from us is our worship and our praise and our religion. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason why we're such a religious people, because that was the only thing they couldn't take from us. Education was beat out of us, so to speak. Understood. That as something that we could not have, something we could not achieve. And if by chance we learned to read, add, or subtract, it was beat out of us because it was taught to us that it was a bad thing. Fast forward to where you were speaking about.
You're on it, yes.
In the church, these things, this history has been really passed on to us, even through the church. So the only thing that we allowed ourselves to do as a religious culture was the spiritual things as the fivefold ministries, not those educational gifts, not the gifts of administration, not these kind of things, because we were taught that if we were educated, then we were trying to be like them. If we were considered smart, that we were against our race. So we weren't really allowed to embrace education and these things and those gifts, those other gifts. If they weren't spiritual, then we didn't allow ourselves to really embrace that in the church. But now we see the necessity for it. And as our generations, again, as we progress through time, and we became a little more, the scripture told us we would become a race of people, the people will become wiser. So now that we have become wiser and we understand, your generation, this generation forward, don't have the same fear, because that was not beat into them or beat out of them. So they don't have the same fear. I remember when we moved to the city of Waterloo in 1996. To me, Waterloo seemed to be so segregated. Mm-hmm. It seemed like a deep South town, and it seemed like all the people of color was on one side of town, and the white people were on the other side of town, or the wealthy people were on the other side of town. Well, not knowing the history of Waterloo, or not being from Waterloo, we didn't know, and no one set us down and gave us the history or schooled us on anything. So we had to learn by living here, by trial and error and everything. One day, your sister, my daughter and I, we were at the mall, at Crossroads Mall, and we were in the Yonkers. Now, we know in Iowa, we know Yonkers was a wealthy store, and in Des Moines, it was really considered a wealthy store, and it was such a wealthy store that they had a tea room upstairs. The black folks ran the elevators to take the white folks up to the tea room, but the black folks weren't allowed in the tea room. So we know Yonkers as being an upscale, store and everything, and like a Neiman Marcus or something. I think Neiman Marcus not even anymore. They've got other stores, but so we were in Yonkers one day, and this older white lady was working the floor, and we were looking through some clothes, and we got to the rack that she was on. She was on the other side of the rack. We were on one side, she was on the other. And she looked up and saw us, and she turned and walked away. There was another shopper in the store who happened to be a white lady, and she looked at the lady, and she's like, "Oh, how are you today?" And they spoke, and "Is there anything I can help you with?" And I looked and I said, I kind of elevated my voice so she could hear me. I wasn't yelling, I just wanted her to hear me. I said, "That's interesting." I said, "Now, we were on the same rack, and she didn't even acknowledge we were in the store." I said, "But that's okay." I was talking to my daughter. I said, "That's okay, baby." I said, "We'll go to some other store because our money is green wherever we go." And I said, "Now," and she looked at me and she said, "Why would somebody do that?" I said, "Because they're ignorant." I said, "But don't let that bother you." I said, "Now, see, anybody else would throw a fit, get loud, cuss the woman out and everything." I said, "But that's not," and all along I'm talking so the lady can hear me. I said, "But she doesn't even know who I am. Mm-hmm. She doesn't know anything about my income." I said, "If I wanted to, I could buy the whole store." And the woman stopped, and she turned and she looked at me and she said, "Oh, hello, ma'am. Can I help you? Can I help you? Is there anything I can help you with?" And I looked at her. I didn't even acknowledge that she said anything. And I turned around and I took my daughter and we left the store. That, again, because I knew we had the power. Mm-hmm. But back in the day, our parents didn't realize that. They would have never thought. And Misha said to me, she said, "Mom, now what made you think of that? How, why would you?" I would have never thought to say that. I'd have told that woman, "You saw me sitting here." But I said, because we have the power. Yeah. You don't have to stoop that low. You don't have to go there, because they expect that out of us. But then when she thought I had the money, then she was willing to treat me the other way. So in that is what I'm saying. Your generation and the generations after us, they realize they have the power now to make change. When we started rioting back in the 60s and before, we felt a little powerless because the minute they called the dogs out, got the water hose, called the police force out, we knew that we were probably going to go down. We knew we couldn't really whoop them at their own game. But this generation says, call the dogs, call your uncle, call the president, call whoever, because we have the power to make change. So for us, and in the church, and in 2 Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, Ephesians, all that, we were taught that we were powerless people, so we carried it over into the church.
Right.
So we praised the Lord quietly at night where they couldn't come and get us. We didn't read the Bible, but we just taught the scripture. That's the reason why, again, our speech was so broken.
Oral
our
history.
part of our, you know. So, you know, that's again, that's now we know.
Right.
So now we know we can embrace these things in the church. It doesn't make us a sinner because we have some intellect.
Yes.
It doesn't make us a sinner because we have degrees. We understand that we can still be people of God and be a doctor, a pharmacist, an admissions counselor, the president of a college. We understand that we can take God with us, but before they made us feel like these two things don't work together.
And let me add this one. I'm enjoying it. And the flip side of that is, do you remember you and your siblings did not like for me to go, y'all looking for cars and things, but y'all didn't want me to go with you to look for vehicles?
That wasn't me. Listen, if you come here if you want. Like,
y'all said, let's take mom because
I know you was bringing with you, so you was invited to come with me.
Because I was more boisterous, and I demand attention.
Assertive, yeah.
Of because the way that my body language and my voice, you know. So anyway.
But even with that, I want to say, even too, and still, and the same thing again was taught even in the church. Again, we used to say church Sunday morning is the most segregated time, you know, in the world. But we understand that white and black can worship together. We understand. I have cousins that are biracial, blood cousins, and we understand. I have uncles and aunts and cousins that have married outside of the race. We understand that biracial and marrying outside of your race doesn't make you an unchristian or unsaved. We understand we can sit down together. You know, we understand that now. But formally, it was put into us that if this happened, you can't, there's no way you can know God. There's no way you can worship the same God, because our God is white and your God is black. But we understand that there's no color lines in God. Right. We understand the scripture now because we have some education.
Absolutely.
So when they try to tell us there's a difference between our worship, we know better. Right. We know people worship differently, but there's no difference between our worship.
Right, right. And you're passing on some really, really good history, because even as I see we have 5 minutes left, there is so much of the Bible that speaks to exactly where we are. Moses was a political figure. We look at Moses and we throw, and this is why, and maybe we'll make this a part 2. This is why we have to discern and study the word and get the truth from the word. We have to study the word for knowledge and revelation. Moses was a political figure. Daniel was a political figure. Nathan was a political figure. Deborah or Deborah was a political figure.
Mhm.
Paul was a political figure.
Joseph.
John the Baptist was a political figure. Joseph was a political figure. And we have these two buckets. And when I say we, I mean those of us, I'll say in the church. You know, I know we get the in the church versus the Christian, but we have these buckets and we throw some things into spiritual and we throw some things into secular or worldly. But Moses was a politician. He took a race of people who were physically oppressed by another race of people, and he liberated them as God led him. That was politics. That was not church. That was politics. So we are, as God's people and children, we are under one God. And all the rules and all the governing, and as we serve and we kneel under a sovereign God, the governments are on his shoulders. There's not these two worlds that are existing, which is secular world and spiritual world. We make that division because it's hard for us to process. And even
and what he still there,
please,
Jesus was considered
yes,
a political person.
they wanted him to overthrow the Roman government.
They thought he was that political guy that was going to be their
King. Yes.
Yes.
Yep. Hail, King of the Jews was nailed to his cross.
Right.
Yeah. And we have to be so careful. I'm going to read the rest of the scripture and I'm going to leave the moments that we have left for you all's reflection. This is, and I gave just that 7th verse, but 1 Corinthians 12:7, I'm probably going to just read to the 10th. This is NIV, by the way. Now to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. To one there is given through the Spirit a message of wisdom, to another a message of knowledge by means of the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit. You can't tell me that activists aren't out there acting on and standing on a faith, a belief that something that isn't reality, something that they don't see is possible through them pushing for change, right? By the same Spirit. And to another, gifts of healing. You can't tell me that a therapist and a psychiatrist can't be a part of a healing process and that can't be gifted to facilitate healing through God's miraculous power. By that one Spirit, to another miraculous powers, to another prophecy, to another distinguishing between spirits, to another speaking in different kinds of tongues, and to still another the interpretation of tongues. I'll just stop. Well, let me read 11. All these are the work of one and the same Spirit, and he distributes them to each one just as he determines. But again, that cascading scripture, verse 7, to the common good. When we are the salt of the earth and we are given these gifts and we are working in all the areas that we're working in, you can't tell me it's not making a difference in this world. You can't tell me that it's not executing justice and equality and inclusion. You know, all of these pieces are things that, you know, even in this time, again, dealing with, as Dad talked about, the two storms, the pandemic, and also this uprising and protest against racial injustice. These are the same things that we are to draw upon, because all of the influencers and the decision makers in these areas are still serving the children of God, are still looking out for the interests of God's people, are still looking out for the equity that God preaches and demonstrates all the way through the Old and New Testament. You know, so you all are really, I think, speaking to a level of introspection in this phase that we're in, and I think a history lesson, you know, that's not weaponized. Not to say one generation was better than the other, that one generation is able to do more than another or was able to have a greater impact. But I think sometimes we have to stop weaponizing history, because we can learn a lot from you all and what you went through, but we learn from it, you know, when you all present these lessons as vitamins and minerals that nourish us and equip us to do what we need to do in our times, versus, you know, how things were just better back in the day and how the old path, you know, was better than, you know, our current ways. Well, hey, I love the old path too, if you present it to me in a way that I can connect to it, as opposed to it being weaponized, you know, to glorify the things that are more common to you because of when you were born versus, us in this generation. So I'm saying that just to stir back around, because you all stirred me up. I'm sorry. I'm saying that to swing back around to you all. How can we have that conversation in a way that's impactful? Because I think there is a significant need for us to have that conversation about our history, about the legacy that we come from, about the values and the aspirations and hopes that you all have, so we can see our opportunity and we can realize our opportunity and we can be a part of the change that needs to happen today and for future generations.
I'm gonna take 15 seconds and then I'm gonna throw you the rest of it. How much time do I have left?
You got as much time as you want.
Okay, I'm gonna take the 15 seconds.
All 15 seconds.
And then I'm gonna go.
Go ahead, please.
Two things real quick. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten
Yes, sir.
Son. All right. Whosoever believeth in him shall not perish of everlasting life. So God so
He didn't give his son for the church. He gave it for the world.
Now watch this. Then we are the salt of the earth.
Yes, sir.
Two things salt does. Give me ask one. Two things salt does.
We're messing with you.
Salt preserves
Mm-hmm.
and it's seasoned. So the saints, we ought to be seasoning this world in every area that we can impact. Because our job is to impact the whole human race.
Mm-hmm.
That's everybody. That's our job until the Lord comes back and rapture his church. So we got to preserve and we have to salt the world. That's the church's job.
Yes, sir.
And Pastor, I had one more comment about the technology that we're using for you.
Oh, I think acknowledging where we were and where we're going and what is. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because so many things have not been acknowledged. And I believe, I've never been in it, I've heard that the 12-step program, Alcoholics Anonymous, they say the first step is admitting there's a problem.
Wow.
And I think, well, once we acknowledge, what was, what is, then we can work on what is to come.
Yeah.
And so many things have just been swept under the rug.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's powerful. I tell you what, you all, you stirred me in this conversation, and I think I'm going to have to build a part 2. There were certainly some other questions in a direction I want to go, talking about phasing, but you certainly provided a good framework and really a valuable history lesson for us. And my aim is to create a conversation next time where we can have a chance to examine that history thoughtfully and make that connection, because history isn't boring. History is contemporary. It's a part of what we're experiencing now, whether we want to acknowledge it or study it or not. So I don't think history is a generational thing, but I think there has to be a very healthy way that we can have that conversation, because there's so much that you all have to share that can equip us. And there's so much related to what we can share about where we are, where you all can pull the books off of, and I'm trying to get to my shelf right here. Yeah. So you all can start pulling the books off of your shelf and say, based off of where you're going, here's a recipe, here's a formula, here's another perspective, or here's a strategy, that you might want to examine to see if it could be useful to where you are. I think that two-way street has to happen, because we can't get anywhere apart. We can only get there together. But I appreciate you all. Love you all. This was an excellent episode, thought-provoking for me, and that's all that counts. No teasing. Thank you all for making yourselves available for this conversation. Love you. And as always, I'll call you after this call ends. So we will talk to you all soon. Love you all. God bless.
Love you too.